Hello, YouTube. This is Global Studies 9, Korea International School, Jeju. So we've made it. This is it. This is the last section, chapter 22, section 2a, the Enlightenment. So a big shift is happening in Europe in regards to how people are being governed. So the old idea was monarchs ruled with an iron fist, with the justification that they're ruling with God's rights, that they had divine rights. Now the new idea is that the government is not run by people with divine rights or people who are born into it, but by the consent of those who are governed, the people. So when we talk about this concept, two people that we have to look at the same coin, separate sides, would be Hobbes and Locke. So Hobbes believed that human beings were just naturally very evil, and that the only reason why human beings collaborate and work together is based on a social contract. That we agree to have this government and agree to have these laws simply so that we can basically survive. Without these laws, without these governments, that people would just be constantly stealing from each other, killing each other, etc. Now, Locke, on the other hand, would disagree with Hobbes' notion, and he believed that people were born with a tabula rasa, like a blank slate, and they had all the possibilities to improve themselves. And he believed that reasonable beings have the natural ability to govern their own affairs, so there was no necessity for a big government to control people's actions, because people by nature have the ability to create a government and be able to govern themselves through the use of a democracy. He believed that all mankind, being all equal and independent, that no one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, or possessions. And Locke often comes up when you look at U.S. history because various doctrines of the Founding Fathers, whether it be the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution of the United States of America, these type of documents clearly use a lot of Locke's ideas. Some of them are incredibly similar. For example, the Declaration of Independence states that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. So very similar to Locke's writing about a century prior to the Declaration of Independence. All right, philosophers. So this should be a little bit of a review since we've already talked about some prominent philosophers in ancient Greece, whether it be Plato, Aristotle, Socrates. So there are people who critique and discuss politics and ideas, and people that believe that reason can be applied to all aspects of life. Some of the core beliefs of philosophers include that truth could be discovered through logic and reason, that what was natural was also good and reasonable, and that happiness is for the here and now. So notice that's almost the polar opposite to what clergy preached in the Middle Ages, right? And the clergy in the Middle Ages preached, especially to peasants who had very unsatisfying lives, that they would have a great life in the afterlife, right? And therefore they could tolerate their miserable lives for the time being. They believe in progress, that human beings and humankind have the ability to progress, and that human beings have the right and liberties, some would state inalienable rights that they have. Voltaire is a very famous philosopher, and he would use witty satire to poke fun at organizations such as clergy, aristocracy, and government. And he was a major proponent of what's known as humanistic virtue. So this is where he rejected formalized religion, and he saw religion as being superstitious and irrational, and that people should use reason and logic when throughout all aspects of their lives. Voltaire had actually a very interesting look in democracy, though. Kind of like Plato, he wasn't a big fan of what would be known as direct democracy, right, where people have the full power. Instead, he believed that as long as the monarchies had the right information, the right consultants, right, the right philosophers helping them out, that was the best way to govern, not a direct democracy. Now, Montesquieu is well known for his idea of checks and balances, where he saw three branches of the government, executive, legislative, and judicial, all balancing each other's powers. This way, you can avoid one group taking over and just dominating and becoming a dictatorship. So what he saw the British government do was have three branches, and the three branches would basically have certain powers, but the other branches would be able to also keep in check those certain powers. And today in the US, they follow the same model where you have the executive branch headed by the president and the vice president, which have departments like agriculture, education, commerce, energy, and homeland security. You have the legislative branch where you have 435 seats in the House, or from various parts of the 50 states, and you have 100 seats in the Senate, so 2 seats per state. And finally, you have the judicial branch with 9 justices, and currently, as of 2017, May, you have 4 Democratic nominees and 5 Republican nominees. So it's somewhat balanced out, politically speaking, as well. So I want to look at the U.S. and the way the U.S. uses the 3 branches a bit more specifically now. So the executive branch, run by the president, has certain powers, like they can appoint the judge they want to the Supreme Court when an opening comes about. They also have powers like vetoing bills. So if the Congress passes something the president does not like, the president can veto that. But at the same time, there are some certain checks on the executive branch. For example, the House is the only one that has the power to declare war, right? The president cannot declare war. Also, if the president does something that could be possibly considered unconstitutional, like Nixon with the Watergate scandal, then it goes to the judges, and the judges can declare a presidential action to be unconstitutional. Now, the Congress, like the executive branch, has certain powers, like they can make laws, and they also have the ability to approve the president's appointment. So when the president tries to appoint a judge, it does have to go through the Senate, and the Senate has to vote a majority, otherwise the president's appointment does not count. But at the same time, the House can't just go ahead and pass any kind of law they want. If they pass a law that could be considered unconstitutional, that's when the judicial branch jumps in and says, hey, you can't do that. And as mentioned earlier, the president can also veto bills passed by the Congress, unless the Congress has 2/3 of the vote. Now finally, the judicial branch. They have certain powers, like being able to say, hey, legislative body, you can't do that. Hey, president, you can't do that. But at the same time, it's not like the judges can say whatever they want. They are kept in balance by the Congress. The Congress can vote out a Supreme Court justice if they consider the Supreme Court justice to go against what their role is. So today we have the top, the executive, so President Trump and Vice President Pence. You have the legislative body, the upper house, lower house, 100 people, and 400 something in the lower house, and finally the 9 judges. All right, moving on to Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He believed that all men were born free, but they're constrained by society's chains. So he looked at social contract as an agreement among free individuals to create a society and government. And what's very interesting about him is that he believed that human beings were born not just free, but they were essentially good. That human beings by nature were good, and therefore we should get rid of these titles like nobility, knights, monarchs, and that all men are equal and we should govern freely. And this is very interesting because this goes directly against what the church had been preaching for years, which was original sin, right? This concept that all human beings are born with the original sin that Adam committed when he was at the Garden of Eden. Now, he's from Geneva, but he's often associated with French philosophy because when the French Revolution comes about, a lot of the individuals involved in the revolution looked at various writings by Jean-Jacques Rousseau as a basis of their movement. Now, a question I want to leave you with that you could consider is, what is a good government, and how does this concept relate to how we view the nature of human beings? So are human beings naturally evil? Are they naturally good? Or are they somewhere in the middle? Is John Locke correct by saying that it's a tabula rasa, that we're simply born neither, and that we become evil or we become good based on how we are raised? And this connects to the Locke versus Hobbes question, which I want you to look at next class, which is, their view on human beings are very different, right? Obviously, Hobbes being very negative and Locke being more positive / neutral. So I want you to think yourselves, which one is correct, or are you somewhere in between? What do you think? And most of all, why? What's your evidence behind your thinking?